If your goal is work-life balance,
Nope.
Won't happen.
get out of here. It's like, hey, sorry, family. We got work to do. This is our busiest time of the year. I stopped doing in-person stuff. I'd be going, hop in the subway, go all the way downtown, walk 5, 10 blocks to get where you're going, train that person for an hour, come all the way back. I was like, man, I don't really want to do this the rest of my life.
How did you generate leads? Because a lot of trainers, they struggle with that.
We had a pretty good idea. The system that we had worked really well. And we're like, okay, this is really the light bulb moment. You get that, hockey curve.
All right, what's up, everyone? Today, we are here with Nick Shaw. Nick, thanks for being here, man.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm excited to have this. So, Nick, before we get going, I think the best place to always start is, tell everyone a little bit about your journey. Obviously, you've been in fitness pretty heavy. I have as well, so I'm sure there'll be some similarities, but maybe just talk a little bit about your journey of like where you started and kind of where you are today.
Sure. So I went to the University of Michigan. The degree was sport management in undergrad. So was always interested in sports or, something along those lines. I always liked working out, but didn't really know what I wanted to do. Probably like most college kids,
Right.
had no idea what I actually wanted to do for the rest of my life. But the last couple of years, I started to really get more and more into fitness when I was in college. And so my buddy, who was a couple of years ahead of me, he ended up co-founding RP with me,
Nice.
said, hey, I'm moving out to New York City to be a personal trainer. Do you have any interests? I said, I don't know what I want to do with my life. So sure, I'd never been in New York City, anything like that. We drove out, my buddy drove me out. It's like a 10-hour drive from Ann Arbor. We drove there, interviewed, got the job. And I think a couple weeks later, I was moving to New York City. And there we go. That was really the beginning of it all.
That's crazy. And then you correct me if I'm wrong, but you've done in person, and now are you doing only online or are you still doing both?
Yeah, I stopped doing in-person stuff in about 2015. So this was 2009 when I moved out to New York City, and I lived there until 2015. And it started out all in person, right? And I think I would tell most people, actually, people ask this all the time, right? And so now we have like a certification program. So that's one of the first questions we get is, all right, well, like, how do I get started doing the online thing? I'm like, whoa, slow your roll a little bit. Get started in person. There's just so much you can learn by interacting with people. It's a lot of the common sense stuff. So you kind of have to have those interpersonal skills build up a little bit. Not only that, but you get some, testimonials, you get some social proof, you get before and after, something like that. Then you can take that and start to get online. But we started all in person. Again, working for a personal training studio in Manhattan. The people we got to train were just some of the most remarkable people in the entire world. Hedge fund people, high level, C-suite folks in New York City, man, just the list goes on and on. Some of literally the wealthiest people in the entire world. So it's really cool. But my buddy ended up leaving after about a year. I was still there. I just kind of got fed up with the idea, or not really the idea, because I guess it was more than an idea. It was what was actually going on. But I had to travel all over New York City to work with people. I'd be going, hop in the subway, go all the way downtown, walk 5, 10 blocks to get where you're going, train that person for an hour, come all the way back, go all the way back. I was like, man, I don't really want to do this the rest of my life. It's really hard to make a living. You can make a good living, of course. I don't know what people charge now, but back in the day, it was like, 80, $100 an hour. But I didn't want to do that. And so my buddy was starting to train people online, and we were sort of referring back and forth to one another. And after a while, we just said, well, why don't we just join forces, create a little company, and then that way it's not weird, it's not awkward referring people back and forth. It's just like, no, like we actually work together, like we're a team. And that honestly was 10 years ago. This is our 10-year anniversary for RP, and that's really how it all got started.
That's awesome. And you guys are still working together, right?
Oh yeah. We are a match made in heaven because the things that he's good at, I'm not good at, and vice versa.
That's awesome because a lot of partnerships, I usually will tell people to stay away from partnerships, but if you can find like that person that really complements you, those are always the best ones, right? And I try to tell people to do that. If you're going to do a partnership, definitely do not find someone who has the same skills as you. You definitely want it to be your weaknesses and vice versa. So let me ask you this. I don't know who does more in the marketing, but when you went from in-person to online, that was my journey. And I was kind of the same boat as you where I just felt my ceiling was a lot higher. And so when you started going online, like, was it strictly referrals? Were you doing Facebook ads? Was it a combination? Like, how did you generate leads? Because a lot of trainers, they struggle with that.
Well, when we first started, it was really all referrals and word of mouth. Of we had like a close group of friends and family. We weren't charging very much. We thought we knew what we were doing pretty well, but of course you have to. To me, it all goes back to you have to sort of prepare to take the long road, and you're not going to become an overnight success. You just gotta, do your best, treat people well, get referrals, and all of a sudden, this sort of group that we started with, let's say, training folks, well, they started referring out, and before too long, we were like, man, we're actually we have a hard time keeping up ourselves. So we had to hire in some other coaches. And then that was pretty cool because we're like, all right, well, now instead of, maybe 50 or 100 clients, we hire in some other coaches. Now maybe we can double that, a couple hundred clients. So that was cool. And it goes back to the, how do you best scale your time? Well, got out of the in-person, could do more online because you can help more people online in 1 hour than you can in person. And so then we're like, all right, well, that's one way to scale it. Now the next is to hire more coaches and bring them in. And then we had a pretty good idea that our methodology, the system that we had, worked really well. So my buddy sat down, he wrote an ebook. So he's the one that does all the content. I run more of kind of marketing.
Like operations, would you say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's how it's the sort of the perfect marriage there. And wrote an ebook. October of 2014, it came out. And I remember it because it didn't look pretty. Ironically enough, I was on the cover, which tells you something, right? But it sold like 1,000 copies in week one. And we're like, okay, this is really interesting. We didn't even sell it on our own site. Like, I don't even know if we had a website at the time.
Yeah.
We sold it through a third party, which ended up, working out great. Of course, it was revenue share and, they took some, but it was great because they had a big audience. But that was really the light bulb moment that said, okay, there's something here to this digital product thing. We got to double down. What do we do from here? And we knew, like, if I'm coaching someone on their nutrition one-on-one, so as long as they're following the plan, of course, we know like what the first step is. Like, hey, we're going to reduce X. And then after that, we're going to reduce Y. So we knew that we pretty much had a systemized way of doing it. And so my buddy created these diet templates, and they were like ugly Excel files. February 2015, they came out, and they didn't really take off super fast, but they did okay. We thought, like, if we sell a couple thousand, that'd be pretty cool. It's just nice extra revenue. But about 3 months after they came out, people started posting their before and afters on social media. And that's when stuff just started to kind of get that, hockey curve.
That's awesome. And
you talked about how you went from in-person to online. So was that like a difficult conversation for some of your clients? Because I know some trainers, they worry. It's like, hey, I've trained this person, I've trained with this person in person, and now I'm trying to tell them online's better, or that's where I'm going. Like, were those conversations hard for you, or is it just kind of like not at all?
So that's a really interesting question. I think that the cool part was I got to be a lot more selective of who I worked with because I knew that I had the online thing. And of course, it's usually a little bit cheaper to do online. So you open up a wider demographic. The folks we were training in person, we're talking Manhattan, like,
right.
Money's not really a huge concern to them. But they weren't really interested in online coaching. They're just like, no, like, if you're not going to do that, just refer me to someone that can do it in person. And that was, more or less it. And so, we had the luxury, I guess, of being more selective. And so it wasn't really a concern because we would just refer out to another trainer in the city. Wow. Like, hey, we know this guy knows what he's doing. I would just, go work with them. And we just pivoted to doing pretty much all online.
Yeah.
And that's actually really sweet because you kind of had the luxury of like, hey, if you don't want to move online, then all right, like, we're going to stop working with you. Did you ever have like any, I don't know, like, and currently right now when you do sell online, is it typically they buy straight from a website, or are you doing any sales calls?
We don't really do many sales calls at all. It's really people see RP from social media, from, paid ads, etc. And they'll just come and they buy everything on the website. Now, I will say that a really interesting, I guess, pivotal point of RP came when we first started selling these templates. So they're customized based on your sex, based on your gender, what your goal is, whether you want to lose weight or gain weight. And so I was manually sending every single file.
Wow.
Like literally, copy, paste, blah, 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 attaching the files. And, gee whiz, that's a lot of work, but it's not it's not the end of the world if you're doing, I don't know, 20, 30 a day, let's say. Well, that's a minute or two each. Like that's, under an hour. It's manageable. But then I had this buddy who was selling, I think he's a catcher. And so he was selling like baseball stuff, and he was, I think, videos or all that. And he was doing it online. And he's like, "Hey man, you got to go check out this email automation thing." And I said, "I don't know anything about that, but I'm tired of having to manually send all this stuff. Please, for the love of God, send me that information." And it was funny because I remember talking with those folks. It was Infusionsoft back in the day, now Keep or whatever they're called. And they're like, "Hey, we have these different tiers. We can help walk you through everything." And I'm like, no. You don't understand. What is your highest tier? I'm going to fly out to wherever you are. I want you to build this all for me. I don't want to have to touch it ever again. And so, they did. Of course, there were some pain points, frustration along the way. But once that happened, that really we weren't quite at that hockey stick yet, but that really allowed that hockey stick to continue for a while. And it was really cool.
Sure. So like, what's your main price point? I'm curious because like a lot of the trainers I worked with and when I came in the industry, I sold over the phone high ticket. And it sounds like a lot of what you're selling is low ticket. So like if someone comes through your funnel or website, what's kind of your main price points and what are they buying typically?
Well, so in the templates back in the day, it was about $99. It's called 100 just for round numbers. And it was a one-time purchase. You bought it. It was yours to use forever. So it's like you came with all the information. You would just read that. You would sort of figure it out. And of course, we would funnel people into a Facebook group where they could interact, ask questions, and we'd be around to help people. And so that was sort of early on, but they were either Excel files or PDF files. So, not like the sexiest thing in the world, but we knew that we wanted to get more towards an app, right? Try to get recurring revenue each month. And so now our price point's a little bit different. And, we sell a bunch of different stuff now. So we have our diet app, which the template's basically morphed into a diet app. So it's $15 a month right now. So pretty low ticket. We've got ebooks, so, $15, $20, $30, nothing too crazy. And then you can go up to one-on-one coaching, which I assume is probably what you were talking about with more of the higher ticket. And, that's a couple $100 a month. And I guess the problem that if we go back to scalability, to me, it was just like, even if you're doing coaching, it's still not super scalable. I mean, unless you want to have 100 coaches.
Right. You got to have a lot of fulfillment typically. Yeah.
Right. But if you can build out the algorithms or sell digital products, those are infinitely scalable. So that was kind of where we shifted our strategy and pivoted towards, and what we probably focus on a little bit more. We still do offer the one-on-one coaching, but I would say we're probably more well known for our app or digital products.
Yeah, and then going into that, because a lot of trainers, it sounds like, and I'll be curious here on your answer. It sounds like you might have had a pretty good social media following. And the reason I say that is, a lot of trainers, if they don't, and they start trying to sell, $15, $20 products, my concern is always like, guys, like you're going to have to spend more than you're going to make. And because you don't have any money, you're going to go broke. And so I guess I'm curious, like, were you guys able to kind of build initially off your social media before you had to start using paid ads? So there was a lot of organic kind of traffic and money coming in?
Yeah. So this goes back to when we started a decade ago. I mean, Facebook was the spot. It was the spot. Way long ago, right? Totally different. Now, like barely anyone uses Facebook. It's like, oh, Facebook. It's really weird. Before it became entirely pay to play. So we, it's kind of one of those things, right? Where if you read about Bill Gates and, some of the tech guys, they like, maybe they're lucky because they kind of rode that wave of like when computers, we definitely rode that wave of when social media was just really starting to take off. And I remember someone telling me, hey, you need to get on Instagram. And I'm like, no way, I'm not getting on Instagram. And I remember the day we made an account, I want to say it was like 2013, something like that. Again, it was a real long time ago. And that absolutely was like our winning ticket, because fitness plays to Instagram super well. You can share before and afters. The coolest part is I don't run our social media anymore. We've got someone that's like way more creative and better than myself. But what was really interesting is back in the day, 90% of the content that we posted was just reposting other people's stuff.
Wow. So what's even your content?
Yeah, it was the greatest thing in the world because I could do it. I'm not that creative, but I'm like, hey, that person just posted a food picture. They tagged RP. Great. there's the next thing. So that was really cool along the way. And yeah, man, things have definitely shifted now. It's a lot harder. It's a lot more competitive now if you're just starting out, especially in the fitness space.
Yeah, and that's why I was just curious because if you can do that, and I tell people like, look, if you have a following or you're able to go generate sales like that, I think it makes a ton of sense. But if you don't, that was kind of my thing is I was really struggling to make sales, and so I actually started with high ticket. So when I sold, like I would sell on average, I sold anywhere between about 2,500 to about 3,000 for a 4-month program. So it's pretty high ticket. And I get really wealthy people, but what helped me is I could run ads because I could make the money back. And so that's like, I definitely think if you can make your model work, it's better long term. And like you said, it's more scalable, et cetera. But you have to make sure the margins are in check because if not, you'll just run yourself into the ground. Or, I was like trying to sell it for free. I was making like $500 a month. It just was not working. But I think that's incredible. You guys got that. And now you probably have so much momentum. It's just, even though it's changed, you just have that, like, it sounded like you had your app subscription, people know who you are. So that's obviously like, I mean, kudos to you. I mean, it worked.
I mean, definitely about building the brand, and you get enough social proof. Because I remember back in the day, people would ask us, "Hey, does RP really work?" We don't really get those questions anymore.
Yeah.
It's not like, does it work? It's like, oh, it's just different questions.
Yeah.
There really is no question anymore because we've got. Again, we could probably chat all day about Instagram algorithms and things like that, and it's really changed the last year and a half or so.
Right.
But before and after, it used to be everything. We literally created a second account for RP. It's called RP_transformations, and all it is before and after pictures of our clients. It's got like 4,000 or 5,000 posts on it. It's 150K followers. But now apparently Instagram doesn't like before and after. So no one even sees the page anymore. So it's, man, you got to be prepared to change. But that really solidified of like, there's no questioning if it works. I can just point you here. It's like the ultimate social proof.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm not quite as familiar with your program. It sounds like you kind of have a secret sauce, so to speak, or something that definitely makes you different. Like I can even see your book in the background, like your shirt. It's RP stands for what it stands for. Like maybe you can get a little bit into that and like what kind of is your guys' secret sauce and like what kind of helps your clients more than like the average person.
So RP stands for Renaissance Periodization, which tells you we had no thoughts to whether or not that we would be relatively well known in the long term, because that's the craziest name in the world. Renaissance, the rebirth. We wanted to be the spot for evidence-based fitness, fitness training / nutrition information. So that's kind of one part of it. The other part is Renaissance Technologies. It's like a super famous hedge fund. So rather than employing a lot of traditional stockbrokers and all that, they literally have formulas and algorithms on how the market works. It's kind of the whole the quant idea. They were some of the first people to do that. So we kind of borrowed the name from those two parts. And then periodization is you take one phase of training to set up the next one to be more successful. So for example, if you were a pro athlete, you're probably not training your absolute hardest in the weight room during the season.
Sure.
You're doing enough to stay in shape, to keep your strength up and all that, but you're not going crazy super hard because you got to perform, let's say, every Sunday if you're an NFL player. So like there's a difference in how you train off season versus in season. That's kind of just a rough idea of what periodization is. But yeah, quickly we were like, all right, our Renaissance Periodization, let's just go by RP Strength. That was our Instagram handle. More people probably know us by that. But in terms of secret sauce, it's really just how do you break down what actually works in fitness in a way that people can understand and ultimately actually use and apply. So, the secret is there is no secret, right? That's kind of the long story short, but it is putting things in a logical, sequential way and format that people can look at it and be, oh, okay, I get this. This is what I need to do. And then you just go out and execute. So it's really, I think people get lost in the weeds because there's so much information. So it's like taking all that information and just boiling it down and like, oh, ignore all that other stuff. Just do this. And at the end of the day, that's really what our program does. And, now there's like, with the diet coaching app, it literally gives you recommendations every week based on how you're doing. So you're like, oh, hey, you're behind track, or you're ahead of schedule. It's going to recommend, should you eat more food? Should you eat less? And then it literally lays it out on a meal by meal basis for you.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting, and maybe you probably can attest to this, but I always felt when I had clients, it was crazy to me how some of the stuff that I thought was just common sense is not like common sense to some people. Like calories, macros, like frequency, just stuff like that where I'm like, you don't know this stuff? And it was like they'll pay good money if you can just show them almost like what I consider like basic stuff, but they don't know because I feel like a lot of programs out there, they're not really teaching. They're kind of just giving them stuff. And so like I would meet people who tried a bunch of programs, but they just followed it blindly, meaning like they weren't really sure. I was like, so why did you do that workout? They're like, well, I mean, I don't know. Like, why did you eat this? They're like, well, I mean, it's healthy. I'm like, okay. So it just like wasn't a lot of thought. So it sounds like you kind of hit on those points where it's like, do you kind of tell your clients like why they're doing certain things? So there's kind of a learning aspect, or what do you think makes it kind of different? Is that like the difference maker?
I mean, I hope so. I think there's some people love that and they love understanding the why. And for those folks, we've got you covered front to back. Our YouTube channel, which is something we focus on a lot the last couple of years. My buddy, Dr. Mike, does all the YouTube stuff. Um, and he's just crushing it on there because he's able to take what can be complex ideas and present them in a way that's just super easy to understand. Plus he's a character. Like he's not afraid to, drop some F bombs and be very entertaining. So there's a lot of entertainment value there. But there's like literally hundreds upon hundreds of free videos that it's like getting a college level education for free. Right. So if you want to learn why, that absolutely builds up a lot of trust. Folks find that YouTube channel, they start watching it. They're like, oh my God, this is so great. It builds a lot of just that trust in the RP brand overall. And they're like, oh man, like, yeah, of course. Oh, now you guys got a cert. Yeah, I want to do it. Or, hey, they sell programs too. Like, yeah, I need to get one. I've been watching Dr. Mike. He's giving out so much free information that, hey, this is the least I can do. So there's definitely one element. But what's also interesting, maybe you ran into this too, but then you also get some people that could not care less the why. They're like, no, I don't want to know. Just, I trust you. You're the expert. You just give me the plan and I will execute it. And I always use the example of I could go watch YouTube videos and learn everything there is to know about car engines. I could. I'm not going to, though. Right. If I ever have car problems, I'm taking it to the car dealer and I'm going to trust that they know what they're doing and they're hopefully going to tell me that, the right stuff. So you get a lot of people like that, that they just want to execute the plan, which is great, right? Because then it's like, all right, boom, 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 boom. You just go out and do it.
Easier. Was there any certain people you kind of followed? So like when I was growing up, I kind of saw guys like Lyle McDonald and Alan Aragon, like Lane Norton. That's kind of the group I got in with because I was very, I think it was actually after Generation Iron. And I met him once. It was Ben Pekulski, but like I remember he was like super like science-based, almost like so much. And then you had, I forget the other bodybuilder, but Texas guy. But he was like the total opposite. He's like, yeah, like, and they were kind of like talking smack on the movies, but then Branch Warren, that's him. Yeah, exactly. And they were kind of talking smack on the movie, right? But I kind of got into that and I was like super intrigued because I'm a kind of analytical, logical guy. So is that kind of the crowd you're kind of in, or like, is there different people you kind of looked up to and followed as you were like getting into fitness? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I guess when we first got started, the evidence-based crowd wasn't really big, or like most people didn't care. But yeah, someone like Alan Aragon, Brad Schoenfeld, Lane Norton, those are all great folks. Highly would recommend checking them all out. John Meadows was another one. If you're familiar with that name, rest in peace. He was a great guy, just absolutely phenomenal stand-up person. And like, yeah, those are definitely people that we all looked up to. And I think now, we probably helped play a role in this, but now it's kind of like the evidence-based fitness community is pretty dang big. Yeah. Or maybe I'm biased because that's what I see more of. So I think it's bigger than it actually is, which could be the case. But it seems like it's definitely grown a lot more here, the last decade or so. So that's been really cool. Because at the end of the day, we just want to help people, achieve their goals, get healthier, get leaner, whatever it is, and not waste their time doing stupid stuff, just doing what works.
Yeah, and I was in that same camp because I was always a really hard worker, but I got to the point I was like, man, if I'm doing all these extra things and I'm not getting any benefit, like what's the point? Because I'm killing myself in the gym. How I attack business now, I used to really go after with sports. And so I would probably, overwork is overused, but I would, train really hard, like really hard to the point where I was doing, sometimes 6 to 9 hours a day between like running and lifting and basketball and film study. It was a lot of stuff. So I definitely got into that crowd, and it was exciting for me. I've heard you quote, and if I misquote you, let me know, but I've kind of heard you say something, if I work really hard and I do what other people aren't willing to do, then I can be successful. Can you speak to that? And is that like accurate how I quoted you there?
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, I think the messages are going to be similar depending on how we word that exactly. Because I've heard some slightly just different quotes on that too. I'm like, dude, they're all great. I think a lot of people kind of overlook sometimes the amount of work that it takes in order to be successful.
Right.
Like, hey, I want to be average. Okay, cool. Like, you work this amount. All right. Well, now you want to be good, right? So there's another level. Well, then there's a difference between average to good to great, to like all pro, let's say, to, greatest of all time. And so we work a lot with like CrossFit folks. And so the example that I always give is Rich Froning. It's like the Michael Jordan of CrossFit.
Beast.
And then people are like, yeah, hey, I want to go compete at the CrossFit Games and do all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, like how much time do you have per day to devote to training? And they're like, oh, like I probably do like 2 hours, which for most people, like 2 hours is phenomenal, right? I don't know if I work out 2 hours a day.
Right.
But I'm like, this guy works out 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And I'm like, I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Yet you may think that I am, but no. And so I think there's a lot of people, they like the idea of being successful. Like, hey, I love the idea of, being rich or having 6-pack abs. And then you lay out the trade-offs that it requires in order to get there. The vast majority of people are going to go, hey, you know what? It sounds good in theory. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to do that. So that's really like, to me, that's what I think of when I sort of hear that quote.
I love that you said that. I actually, when I started my business, I got to kind of a breaking point where I was like, if I don't, this is going to work or I'm going to be homeless. Like I actually remember that thought. And I started working about 16 hours a day, maybe 18 some days. And it's so easy to say, right? I work 16 hours a day. It takes 5 seconds. But if you actually picture someone working 16 hours a day and like actually doing tasks the whole time, it's just completely different level, right? And to your point there as well, I agree, because like you do have to give stuff up. There are trade-offs. And so part of my story, when I'm like asked like, how did you come up? I was like, I gave up dating, I gave up drinking, partying, friends. I didn't ever go out. I would work and sleep, but it just got to the point where I just was willing to do anything. And I agree with you. I see it all the time where it's almost like I'll do it as long as it's not an inconvenience, or I'll do it as long as I still have work-life balance. And I just don't even think that's a real thing. I just think, like, to your point, I watched the Michael Jordan documentary. I don't know if you watched it. And I don't know what the quote was, but it was something in there where like every time he got to a new level, he kind of knew that because he got there, how much better he could get still. And that's kind of what drove him to always keep trying to be great. And like, I get goosebumps because that's what drives me, is I feel like no matter how good I get, it's every level. Yeah. Like every level, you kind of know you can get to the next one. And I think that's just like a quality in a lot of successful people I've met, where it's almost this insecurity, right? Like this insecurity that they're not going to be good enough, but the confidence that they can get there. And it's like it never ends, because I remember my first goal was like, I want to hit $1 million in a month in my business. And once I finally got there, it was like a full day. I remember I was like elated. I had this huge party and all this stuff. And then the next day I was like, all right, man, like what's the next thing?
What's next?
And it's funny because you think when you arrive, you're going to feel different. You really don't. And then you realize, at least for me, like, it was that journey, and the journey to me is what is the reward. And it took me a few years to understand that. But once you realize that, I think the people are the most successful. They actually enjoy the journey. And the average human does not, because it's painful, but it's like, I think guys like maybe you and me, we kind of like it because we understand that's where the growth comes from, and you can't grow without kind of that obstacle. So I love that you said that. And anyways, I got excited because it's like I could go on and on. I love that.
So I want to add a couple things.
Yeah,
if
please.
that's okay.
Sure.
So you mentioned the work-life balance. So I love thinking about that. And here's what I've told people. You can eventually get to a place where you have a little bit of work-life balance, and you probably should, right? For, long term, let's say. But when you're just starting out, if your goal is work-life balance,
Won't happen.
get out of here. Like you're not like you might be successful, but you're not going to be nearly as successful as you otherwise could. And I'm going to say chances are you won't be successful overall.
Yeah.
You have to throw that notion out the window. There is no work-life balance early on. Like what you said, I remember honestly, it was really just like me and my wife pretty much doing everything on the operation side, answering customer emails or, doing all this. It was nonstop. And I was working with a lot of clients at the time. I just remember we were like in a rat race, so we couldn't get out of it because if we stopped, it would just build up for days on end. And it's like we can't stop. Holidays, whatever, because you get Black Friday, Cyber Monday that falls, around Thanksgiving. It's like, hey, sorry, family, like we got work to do. This is our busiest time of the year. Now we eventually got to a point where we could hire in some customer service people and do all this stuff to help. But like, man, no, we wouldn't have been, nearly where we are now if we would have had that balance early on. It's a trade-off. It really is.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And it's funny because I don't know if, I'm curious on your take, but for me, I worked pretty much all day, every day until my business got big enough where I could hire people. And now I've got about
80 to 90 people on staff. And so it's funny, but it actually changes. I don't know where the change happened, but it gets to the point where you actually have to remove yourself and stop doing so much because you actually get in the way of the business growing. Because like, at least, again, like I'll be curious on your take, but even if I took 12 sales calls a day, it's like, well, we have 40 to 50 calls a day. So it's like, is that really going to help the business grow? Or even if I, did some type of operation all day, it's like the business actually gets to a point, I think, where it gets so big that I actually had to step out. And it was so hard because I was so used to being busy and doing stuff. But I would say 99% of people never get there. They think they're there day one and they're like hiring stuff out and they're making no money. And I'm like, why are you hiring stuff out? Like, that means you're doing tasks that make you no money, which means they're not important. Like, why aren't you doing stuff that makes you money? So like, I'm curious on that. Like, do you work less now? And the reason for that, what I mean by work less is like, you're just doing less busy tasks. You're doing maybe more like creative thinking or like you're managing the team. Like what's kind of, I guess, where are you at on that journey?
Yeah, it's trippy because I love working and doing stuff and feeling like that sense of accomplishment from knowing that you did stuff. And there definitely came a point where now nearly all of my time is spent on like more of the management side, management slash leadership, whatever you want to call it there. And there are days where I've said this before, even probably some of my colleagues, like there are days where I feel like I've done absolutely nothing. But I know that I've done stuff. It's just a different way of doing stuff, I guess, is maybe the way to describe it. And it's like I still struggle with that because I'm just like, man, I feel like, is it cool if I swear?
Yeah, you're good, dude.
Okay.
Go, man.
Like I feel like a giant piece of shit that's not doing anything. And then I'm like, well, I guess I was on the phone for 3 or 4 hours talking to different colleagues or, working on, business development kind of things. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I did do stuff, but it's just so weird, man. I honestly, I still sort of struggle wrap my head around it now.
Well, and I think it's good for people to hear because I think what happens and what I fell into is I saw guys like Gary Vee and Lewis Howes and like Andy Frisella and I'm like seeing all this content they're doing. I'm like, oh, that's like what I should be doing. And it's like that, you're seeing them at the end of the journey. They're way down here. And it's like when they started, like that's totally different. And so it's funny now, like, in the past, like even doing this podcast, I'd be like, no, I'm not doing that. That's like a total waste of my time. Like I got so much stuff to do. But it's funny now, my team's like, Tanner, like leave us alone. Like show it, like it's like management, like you said, leadership, and then go like promote the company, put yourself out there, like create interviews, talk to people. And that's kind of, I think, where you're coming from, where I feel like, man, like all I did is shoot like some reels and TikToks and podcasts today. It didn't really feel like work, but it's actually ironic because the bigger the company gets, you have to kind of let other people step in and be proactive and creative. And so I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm the same way. I love being busy, and I love feeling like I'm accomplishing something, but it's been crazy for me to kind of step out of the company and then need to do different tasks, versus in the beginning, it was like customer support, sales, client fulfillment, emails, and it kind of sounds like where you're at, which is cool. I see 2 books in the background, and it looks like you wrote both of them. Maybe you could talk a little bit about like what those books both are about, and maybe your writing process. Like, I wrote one book and it was a lot harder than I thought. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah. So the one is Renaissance Diet 2.0. Actually, did not write it. Some of my colleagues did. So that goes back to what you were talking about. Of, hey, just let the smart people go do what they're good at. So that's basically just the RP methodology when it comes to nutrition, like all distilled down into one book, and it's great. Honestly, it's all about like nutrition for performance and body composition changes. So if you wanted to lose weight, gain weight, lose fat, gain muscle, etc. I don't think there's any other better book out there in the entire world. The other book is called Fit for Success. So I got like really, really big into reading, audiobooks, podcasts. And for me, what started to click one day is I was listening, you start listening to different books, kind of completely different topics: military history, business leadership, personal finances, fitness, etc. And I started to piece together, like I would keep notes in my phone. Well, like, hey, this person was successful because of X, Y, and Z. And I said, well, man, that sounds a lot like what this person did. And it was a completely separate topic. And so I basically created this list of like 10 things that I thought successful people did. And then I broke it down into basically 7 main habits of success. And that's what my book was all about. So it actually came out during the COVID year. I was quarantined. My wife had very serious health stuff, so we weren't going anywhere. And I was like, well, you know what? I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to make the most of this time. And so I sat down, and I kind of had a rough draft in mind, but I sat down and really just started typing it. Lo and behold, you got 40,000 plus words. Handed it off to an editing team, which hopefully made me sound reasonably smart. And then it came out at the end of the year. And the reason I wanted to come out, I didn't go like traditional publishing route, which it takes a couple of years. I didn't want to do that because I wanted to come out before the end of 2020, when everyone was impacted by COVID. It's like whether you're successful in business, personal finances, fitness, overcoming adversity, like, there's some universal principles. And so I just figured, I know it's helpful for me, and I know that it'll also be helpful for other people. So that was really
Yeah, like would you say that mindset is really important? Because, like, for example, I'll hear stuff like, oh, we're going into a recession, or it's the holidays. And my thought is always like, cool, like I'm better than everyone, so I'm going to win. Like, great, we're going into a recession. That means the best businesses will do better and the bad ones will leave. And it's almost like the opposite for most people. They're like, oh, we're going to a recession. This is going to suck. Like, I'm like almost like the victim mentality. And so would you say that, having a positive mindset has helped you? Maybe it hasn't. I don't know. Like, has it played a role in your success?
It's totally helped. And I think that's one part of it. The other part is what's called internal locus of control. So when someone says, yeah, we're going into a recession, or we are in a recession, the economy is not that great right now. But you can't control that, right? Like, you're one person, you're one business, one company. Like, you can't control the world economy. But what can you control? You do a good job with your customers. You keep working on the next, big update, or, app development, or, new product or service that you can offer. Those are all things you can actually control. And when you focus on things that you actually control, it typically gives people hope, because they know that their actions, their thoughts, what they say, what they think, and what they do actually does matter, and it makes a difference. Whereas if you tend to dwell on things that you don't have any control over, that's where you get that, like learned hope, hopelessness feeling, where you're like, well, nothing that I do matters. Like, why even do anything? Man, that's a really slippery slope. And I would say that to me is the biggest part of the mindset. You got to focus on what you can control. And then if you know that your actions and the things that you do on a day-to-day basis make a difference, well, man, you're going to keep taking steps to take that action and to keep going. And then it becomes a positive feedback loop. because you know what you do matters. You take more action, and then it just kind of keeps building on itself.
Yeah, I love that. I think a lot of people kind of shoot themselves in the foot because they do focus on things they can't control. And a lot of times I'm like, it just doesn't matter. It's like there's been businesses that have been built in recessions, and there's always examples of people who've overcome. And so I always try to focus on the positive. So I love that you do that. Um, like any trainers out there, I to like kind of wrap up, like any trainers out there, is there any advice that you would give them? So like going back as an in-person trainer, you transition online, you've obviously had some success. I find that a lot of trainers really love what they do, but they just have no clue how to make money, or they have no clue how to make sales. And it's kind of sad for me, and part of why I got in this industry, because I loved fitness more than like anything. And I realized after a certain point, I was like, you know what, unless I become Mr. Olympia, or I get this massive following, or like, get sponsored, even then it's just like, man, there's just not a lot of money almost. Like it's like you got to do something and create a business. And so is there like any advice that you give trainers, or would encourage trainers with to do if like you could go back and kind of had to redo everything all over?
Yeah, probably a couple things. Start in person, develop those interpersonal skills, learn how to interact better with people. And, unless you're just Miss or Mrs. Extrovert that just is a people person, you got to probably build those skills. Listen better, take people's feedback, learn to, just all that stuff. You just can't replace it. Just interacting with, because let's say you have 10, 15, 20 clients in person. Well, every person's different. So you're going to sort of just pick up some little nuances and how you need to interact with folks. Super valuable. You don't have any social proof. No one knows that you know what you're doing when you're just starting out. You have to take that time, develop all that, right? Develop that you have some sort of evidence that you know what you're doing. So you have to do all that. The other big thing, and I think this is amplified by social media, is a lot of times folks, and it's like what you said earlier when you were talking about Andy Frisella and Gary Vee and all that, they just sort of see the end result.
Mm-hmm.
And you miss this whole thing along the way. And so people sort of expect from where they're at on day one to, day two to, be so successful. And it's like, man, it just doesn't happen overnight. And if I really had that one piece of advice, I'd be, you have to play the long game. You're not going to be successful overnight. Chances are you're not going to be successful in a month, probably even a year if we're being realistic. But you just have to know, right? It goes back to that hope. And you have to know that the things that you are doing do make a difference. And obviously, you have to keep track of that to make sure you're doing the right things. But it's just really taking that long-term approach. And if people can do that, man, I just think you're going to be less discouraged along the way, because it's going to suck. It's not going to be this super easy walk in the park. And I think sometimes people overlook that because they're like, oh, well, so-and-so's like, they got 1 million followers and they're just like sitting in their bedroom all day. And it's like, okay, great. But they weren't doing that to get there. I mean, maybe they were because they're doing some ass whatever stuff. But
I love that you said that. Something that I finally realized was when I was kind of broke, I looked at other people. I was like, if I can just get to there, like I'll feel different. And so when I got there, I realized that instead of comparing myself to kind of the people who were where I started, I was like comparing myself to Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. And I realized like, man, it never ends, right? So as you get to new levels, you think people are like, oh, you're going to feel a certain way, but you actually just typically you keep looking higher and higher. And so I kind of fallen in love with just the process. And what I mean by that is, if your goal is to grow like 1 million subs, or your goal is to build a 9-figure company or whatever, I just think like if you can get in love with the process, it really becomes less about if you succeed or not. Because like when I played football, I wanted to play in the NFL and I got hurt. But I knew that when I got hurt, I'd done everything I could have done. Like I played with Ezekiel Ansah. I don't know if you heard of him. He's a Pro Bowler. I played with Randy Gregory. He signed like a $60 million contract this year after he left the Cowboys. And I remember when I got hurt and it wasn't going to go any farther, I just remember thinking I did everything I could have done. I did all the extra workouts, all the extra sets, the reps, summer training. And those guys were just so much better than me, like physically, genetically. And so when I walked away, I was sad, but I walked away, I was like, damn, dude, like that's as far as I could have gone. Instead of most people, I think they're so scared of failing, they never try. And then they just have this regret when they're older. And it's taken me like, when you're 20, I just turned 30, or I turned 30. I always say that like I sound younger. I'm 30. But it's funny, like I don't know if you can relate to that, but when I was 20, I used to like think that was such BS, but now it's like, I know it's true because there's just so many levels. It's like, you're never necessarily going to win. There's only like one guy at the top in every single thing in life. And so I think if you can fall in love with that and you just give it your all, that actually is the reward versus the actual outcome. So I don't know if you agree with that, but that like to me is kind of like what you just said and what like people need to kind of get in line with, because otherwise you're just always going to be miserable because there's always someone beating you. Always, like, except unless you're Elon Musk, right? Like that's about it.
Yeah, and even then, he's taking some shots right now too with the whole Twitter thing. So yeah, well, so man, what you said is literally, I feel like we could chat for 6 hours about all this stuff.
I know. Yeah.
So a couple things there. The falling in love with I guess, the journey, the process. I want to say so. There's a book, Brad Stulberg and I think Steve Magnus are the two co-authors, and it's called I don't remember what the book is off the top of my head, but there's a term, and I remember reading it because it just like it was like just one of those light bulb moments in my head. But they called it the mastery mindset, and it really just was you're not very concerned with the end goal. I mean, you are, like, don't get me wrong, you are, but you aren't. And what's really cool is you can take that and you can apply the same concept to fitness. You might want to lose 20 or 30 pounds. You can't necessarily have full control over how much weight you lose, because there's water weight fluctuations and all that stuff. But that's the outcome goal. You can focus on the behavior goals of, all right, I want to lose 20 pounds. So now I'm going to commit to training 3 times a week or meal prepping twice a week, whatever it is, right? You can make up whatever those behavior goals are, but that's the difference. It's like you focus on the behaviors, not the outcome. To me, I don't know, like, I guess I'm so biased towards internal locus of control, but it all goes back to that because you do have control over that. The end goal, again, you might not always have full, complete control over it because guess what? You might be doing everything right in your business. Say you're in, I don't know, manufacturing or whatever, and then COVID hits and you're like, boom, you just get slapped across the face. Like, you can't necessarily control that. And like, maybe you would have been on your way to 10 or 100x, but now like you have this little roadblock, you have a stumbling block. So yeah, it's you do have to fall in love with the process. And I love fitness because it's to me the ultimate metaphor for that. Like,
Right.
take bodybuilding. I just competed not too long ago. That was like the first time I'd competed in like a decade. And I kept telling myself, bodybuilding is a completely subjective sport.
100%.
I
100%.
might
100%.
I might look really good, but I get up on stage and like those guys are just simply better than me. And like, did I do everything that I could? It's just like you said. And if you do that, you just have to be happy because you have to sort of think. And this is what I told myself, literally every single day when I was doing cardio. I was like, you just focus on the things you can control. I can't control, who's going to show up.
Right.
I mean, you might have some Dorian Yates freak show that walks in and, your local competition. You're like, all right, come on, I can't do anything here. And it's kind of like you said. I mean, Randy Gregg, you're talking what, like 6'5", 260 guy.
Yeah.
Probably runs what, like
And bro, and he
Never worked out, skipped class all the time. And I'm just like, but the coaches were like, you're going first round, bro, if you just like stay in school. And it was like, I'm training as hard as I can. And it's like, it still doesn't amount to anything because he's just so gifted,
So just do the best you can.
Yeah. And then to wrap that up, like, I love that. I feel like we view things a lot the same. It's just a lot of people don't care, I think, as much as we think. And so it was funny when I built this big company and like, maybe you can attest that I thought like, people kind of care, but they don't. Like, all this time and effort I put in, I'm like, yeah, like I make this much a year and I have this big a company. And they're like, cool, dude. Yeah. Like, you ready to go? And I'm just like, wait, like, dude, like, did you like hear me? Like, did you hear the number I just said? And I think like, that's the other thing too, is people, we always think like others care more than they do. And when I got to that point in business, even fitness, like I realized, I was like, man, why am I doing all this? Like, no one cares, doesn't really matter. Like, I almost even felt like I hadn't helped a lot of people because I'm like, well, Mark Zuckerberg's kicking my ass. He's helped all these people and I've barely done this. And then I kind of sat there. I was like, you know what? I like this stuff though. Like, I like it. And I think, I don't know, it's a whole journey and like you got to mature and so forth. But I think to your point, that's like when you get to that point, just everything becomes easier and more fun. I think you almost become more successful because it's like you're doing it for the growth and you're not doing it for external validation. And man, with social media, it's tough. Like, I don't even know if I want kids because I'm like, man, the way social media is now, it's like, it's almost like that's how people view the world. And like, it's not always that way. Like, even if you watch some of those like Instagram channels, they'll say like influencers in the wild, and it like shows how they're taking pictures and stuff and like what they'll post and how they're actually doing it. So anyway, sorry to go on a tangent, but like I see eye to eye with you on a lot of things, and I love that. Like Nick, for anyone who's watching, like where can they find out more about you, or like, where can they connect with you on social?
Yeah, so at RP Strength is like our main Instagram page. It's the one we've just always, it's that one that we randomly started way back in 2013, and I guess it ended up being a good idea. That's a good one, especially if you're into fitness. I know you'll get a lot out of it. I would also say go check out our YouTube channel, because if you're anything into fitness, there's something for you there. Dr. Mike is a character. I guarantee it's going to be entertaining, especially if you don't mind a little foul language here and there. So those are probably the main two. And then, even myself personally on Instagram, it's just at nick.shaw.rp.
Awesome. Well, dude, I appreciate you coming by today. Love the combo. As you could tell, I got excited and I started going on tangents, and that's always a good sign. But yeah, appreciate you guys. Please go follow him, YouTube, his business pages. Absolute stud. And Nick, thanks for being here, man.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, man. It's a really great conversation. I think there's so many parallels with fitness and just business that, yeah, it's just really cool. We can chat all day about it.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for being here.